Nagkakaroon mo na ilan mo na may kaiman mo. Halin nilulupin mga nilulupin mo mansaw. We were supposed to start at 6 p.m. Let's just have 2 more minutes and then we start our little program this evening. Alwase malungkot ko sige dari kita roboy kung era ministry kita Ministry of Human Resources, Culture, Tourism and Development bekerja malungkot ko sige dari kita roboy bukan sound kini ko sundul kaya ilang ko sige ako din kasi nakawala tuntan nila dito din nakawala din sekali bukan sige malasa lagi dan mengatakan mau mesti lagi dah mau tunggu saja ada dulu yang mau miskin dan ada box game yang mau melasan lagi pan melasan melalui dengan Babeldaob di mana ada asal kemudian bisa menahan aset maka boleh itu kami ingin dari mana melalui dengan Babeldaob aktif melasan lagi boleh sebenarnya tempat ada bentuk orang ingin sendiri tidak perlu harus sudah ada ini kita semua ada mungkin ini Babeldaob. So soal dalam sendiri menimpa itu termasuk dalam tengah Vice President terkini untuk sama baru senior di kaki lembaga pengajar dalam sendiri dengan termasuknya tidak lembaga pengajar dalam tengah Minister Kelas untuk gaya ini Minister Human Resources, Culture, Tourism and Development. Jadi kemudian masuknya Babeldaob kaya ang sige magtanong ngayon, gigil puro, magyo, pangirakin, ginumbay, minakako, mga mga sa mga Babeldaob, looking ka ng Jesús, kaya ang anin, mo tayo niya, Babeldaob, Babeldaob, kung maraming ka ang Babeldaob. Kalau tidak kelman mereka asulah Australia, the Honorable Michelle Turner. Thank you for joining us, Ambassador. historical and cultural macam oras at view kung mag-isaw na ako dan Los Angeles na Jesus mag-isaw. Ang kung university ng New Director Bureau of Cultural, Historical Preservation and Miss Ignas Samarahab, nagdagdag ng description kung bakit sila ito mga aspirintan ito kamali. At the same time, nagdagdag siomay, lagi ganti kung yung gusto nyo ng pamagantan lahat at sa inyo. Kung sulang.
Lebih maksudnya mau syukurkan mau sebenarnya terapkan order. Bukan dia Dr. Annette Kuhlem, dia 1981. Bukan nakira atau dulu na Abdullah kedua Ghana, Ivory Coast sama Afrika, Bolivia, balik ke Babeldaob. Yang lungsu bermati bersama, Ayus mereka bisa lah, mereka dulu, apa dulu, yang mau terlihat lorura serapa Taiyo, Hania Palui, Easter Island, Solomon Island, French Polynesia. Marquesas, mereka lagi berjalan. Kalau mereka berjalan dengan subra yang berlalang pun 2019, lalu March selama itu mereka akan subra lagi. Kalau mereka orang saya ini orang yang lain sekian mereka subra. Jika itu lagi kan Allah lagi kan Rio, kita kan Los Akla was horse trainer kan luar bukan berada di Barcelona ini 2000 dua degree la master será 2005 e agora uma PhD na 2012 aku ini pun beberapa buku sa doktor dengan dia Dr. Annette Kuhlem was born in Germany. She lived in many places including Ghana, Ivory Coast, Bolivia, and among others. Her current archaeology spans nearly 2 years since 2013 until today, and she has conducted her several archaeological investigations in 11, nearly 10 years, including Easter Island, Solomon Islands, French Polynesia, Marquesas, and recently here in Palau. She first started coming to Palau to study the terraces in 2019 and is now in the final stages of her fieldwork and research. Outside of her work, Annette is a horse trainer. Annette earned her university entrance diploma, to bachelor's in 2000, and master's degree in 2005, and in 2012 she earned her PhD and has since had several publications from 2011 to 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving Annette a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. Is it okay for everybody by taking my hand? Thank you. Yes, so thank you very much to all of you for coming, for your interest, for your enthusiasm. We were incredibly lucky that we were able to come to Palau and do field work despite the pandemic. We were very lucky, twice, because in 2020 we were pretty much the last ones who got any archaeological work before the pandemic hit and everything closed down. And then we used that little small window in October of last year to come here and continue. And actually that time in between was kind of useful for us as well, because every once in a while we need some time to actually process data, all the analysis and think. And that's something that the pandemic actually provided.
Segment bulan masa berbeda, umat makai kita berarti kita belum masuk. Kawan-kawan kita belum kita pandemi mungkin sebagai umat sahur.
German Archaeological Institute and the Palau Resources Institute. And yeah, we kind of joined forces. We're a very interdisciplinary team, so I'm the one here, but there are a lot of other people. Many of them have already been here for a while, done research actively, and then those people who work in the background, do the lab analysis. And yeah, we're very lucky to have experts from many different fields, from the natural and the cultural sciences. And we are lucky to have state-of-the-art technology as well, which helps us a lot to make our work more streamlined and faster.
Abbiamo mo sa ako trabaho kami tayo sa way fikir mo sa mga ulo sa Christian komunitas sa ng dulang kasi ngapya kasi sa loob ng lagi na kiti dahil sila kaya observe ng archaeology sa ilang kami magiging ulo ni kapag next time isa na wais masih mati pula isa na wais kita ulo masih ada mati lintang ng rote ulo jadi kita ulo sa saksi berarti itu faktor ulang ni kaya hasil ini kita jadi berarti audio kira mata lagi ulo kita kita panggil lagi dari makhluk ulo di kita lalu kita ambil belau dengan memprotek langsung lalu kita hasil alamnya actually cara kalian steady Palau Resources Institute jadi lagi kita betul dan mengira hasil orang betul lagi lalu bukan kayak itu betul betul lalu misalnya.
Okay, so that being said, so we're this very interdisciplinary group of archaeologists and other scientists that have joined together for this project, but I really want to make a point that we are not the first ones to do archaeology here. There have been other very significant projects. I maybe want to point out Jody Liston, who has done amazing work here for many, many years. So yeah, we are not the first ones, and I really thank Jody for making us feel welcome and helping us along the way. So a big thank you to her. What our general interest as a research group is to find out how humans change islands, how they change the landscape and the ecosystems. And we've been doing that on many different islands in the Pacific. So Kiel's already mentioned a couple of the work on the Marquesas, on Easter Island, the Solomons, Chatham Islands, New Zealand itself, Robinson Crusoe Islands goes to South America, Guam, and now we're here in Palau and trying to find out how humans have affected island ecosystems and to what degree and how they then responded to those changes.
Otherwise, the people who say, "Gagal, ketinggalan Babeldaob, tele-tele namin na lokok by tingali na alam na tinama umur archaeology science paling ingin musuh musuh bagian tele na lokok by mungkin ketika ada kamu ada berbeda yang mempercayai musuh kepada archaeologist kepada kita ada namin Babeldaob jadi kita kami ambil di lokasi dan macam ada musuh sesuatu itu nampil kepada kita ada beda tadi mungkin menjadi terbunuh posisi dulu dan kerana Babeldaob. Jadi otherwise masih tidak tahu umur dari mana sih wajar itu usul kemudian masih tidak karena kami itu dan ini lah matu aja dulu dia ini dan belum terkira hasil komposisi kita soal apa
On many of those islands in Oceania, there are very impressive archaeological remains and this aspect of monumentality where kind of the concept is that political or religious power is being shown through very big, very visible things or buildings. And most people in the world probably know the moai, the statues of Israel, or the ruins of Nan Madol and Monape. And it's always surprising to me that so few people know about the earthworks here in Palau. There are so many visitors from all over the world, and everybody knows that just to the north This is happening, and this is absolutely without any parallel. Like this kind of monumentality, this degree of landscape transformation, all those different earthworks that sometimes join into big earthworks complexes. That is something that really exists here in Palau, and it's kind of flying under the radar.
Solo puede ser por base algo hay gallinas de hombres en día moda la de la última a toda esa libertad y ahora a buscarme por ahora akan sini akan sisi government mengetong dior menanya ko dior ada pula pun malu kan kita orang lagi Oke gitu pun. Esok tu guys masih betul lagi lah. Betul dulu orang nak betul lagi ilmu pelura. South Pacific, Monumental Israel Island dan kita lalu saya ini betul klip pelura pelame betul alam sungai ini mereka bisa. Hindi masuk guys masih ini tu bukan cerita aku nak rapor bela baik ini tu. Ni yang orang sental betul rapor bela. Orang asasi lagi dari orang yang nak berbeda. Mengenal sebenarnya besok ni orang berbeda lagi supaya ini tinggalkan ni ya.
So what's extremely significant about those earthworks is not only their monumentality and how much they shape and change the landscape of it, but it's also when we're talking about this monumentality and how people want to show their power through giant construction. The very first expressions of this, by hundreds of years, is here in Palau for all of Oceania. It's immensely significant that this concept that is so important all the way across the Pacific, all the way over to Easter Island, seems to have had its very roots here from what we know so far.
Ada orang surido orang tak kisi elah begini malu kisi elah begini bertemu dengan itu beramal klon monumental yang boleh itu berbeda mal bakul itu all jika itu saya mengasihkan itu pun mesti mau saya lagi dan ada dengan dia hotel yang berbeda berbeda lebih jadi itu domes memang betul kan klon jadi tak punya ada hotel mesti nak mengarah kalau kali dan asaman sebenarnya kita mengatkan besok yang sebagai malam itu.
So from our perspective as researchers, this was definitely something, Palau Babeldaob was definitely something that we had to take a closer look at because it's so outstanding, it's so unique. And we started this whole project kind of from the very big scale view to a smaller scale view. And we started out evaluating satellite photos and historical aerial photos on which you can see many of those giant earthwork complexes.
Coba eksplorasi agak kita mal baklo luar dia apa ni? Agak kita amal seperti domes, agak Kuhlem, sila no saya lagi no sara kawan mana yang siasi tentang apa dulu Omes sama Kuhlem lagi ini dulu lagi lo datang kita ramu dengan Omes masih mandi bisa lokong memperlakukan masih mandi kemudian anaknya mau Kuhlem untuk telan 50 malah ada yang anak biru dua sih dia mau sehingga kalau kita nggak ramal sebenarnya ini excited yang orang kita tidak mengatakan kalau saya itu orang itu ayah kita siasat lagi kita siasat kita ada manusia.
So I just wanted to compare real quick this picture which was taken in 1971 and then a recent Google Earth satellite image, and you just go back and you can see how the vegetation is actually covering those earthworks more and more. Yeah. So the older the photos from our perspective now, the better we can see how many earthworks there actually are, and that's what our surveyor Christian-Albrechts-University is doing. He evaluated historical photographs, and he only has them so far. Maybe Jody can help with some more for the midsection of Babeldaob. But from what he has evaluated so far, he found 132 earthworks. So that's significant.
Silulod nila sa sikra Babeldaob sa 1971 sila umarpa mulu dunyong dahulu hotel sige tidak satu untuk belum mengurang karakter mengharapkan mengurang level best sige betul laut dalam alian kesini prosesi dulu jadi awal prosesi dengan absen nomor sendiri paling cinta bawa kalau makarakter dengar dia mulai kalau mungkin kita kembali pesta aku dulu lagi di dunia rao dalam hindi ako suwil dalam Babeldaob ini dua orang yang lagi rasa aku Babeldaob tentang jadi desain mari dia akan hotel belum dalam negara rasa aku Babeldaob jadi kita belum akan memilih akan Babeldaob so sekira desain sehingga mungkin pulang usaha aku mungkin amannya ada betul awal malah ada orang mengambil dari dalam
We selected 14 different earthworks all across Babeldaob, and we tried to select from very different kind of locations, some more inland, some closer to the coast, and to get a pretty broad picture of what type of earthworks and in what kind of settings. And then he used a drone to create those digital elevation maps to get very detailed documentation and to see many small features of it, like those small terrace steps that you don't see just from the road. If you drive through Babeldaob, you will maybe just see those red areas that are very high, but all those details you can really only see from the air with the drone.
Magno kay lang lang lagi magtira awal mura dal dulu ako supir hindi mo malit asese kay lang lang ang tira sa tingin ko o mes din tangan lagi dulu lagi tinggal dulu makanya lagi dulu lagi mura tira pura pengurus jadi dulu supir kay dari sa sini mes Annette spera again mesti dari mura Lumulong marang ang real posendro the pronunciation. Hindi sa iyo nro na respect in malayaling sasi sa umores and malungil mala sasi ng sistema mo sa iyo kung man lagi grego na lang di os and para sino siya wala na ang sa umores. Kaya sasi mala sa kungaran mo sa pelos pa ay so para midil na talalo hindi naman ko makatangay Kaya yung lalang para naman may internet mo yung siya o ako yung nilainan ng lalang sa ina makatanda makatulog klaro kaya ang internet na mangurang sa mandan katulog na kami.
So our initial assumption was this is just a schematics of any given earthwork. Our initial assumption was that of the original surfaces, what had been up on top, not much remained. We believed that those original surfaces would only be preserved like in the small little depressions and at the bottom, because we thought what is the case now with modern projects that you have, due to the harsh rains here, often you got heavy tropical storms, that pretty much there's a lot of erosion and that sediment gets washed down the hill and deposited at the base. And did it ever turn out that we were wrong about that? And that's why you dig holes, that's why you do archaeology, to find out whether your hypothesis is actually correct or not. And we were very wrong on that assumption.
Visualize mo sa isil niyo taswir bago sa para petele lagi daw ng lang yung kasi mo sa suman na raporto ay ibig at talaga ba kung orang lang marado pa sige na send do sa orang lang niya dan way itilga ko ng baso tumde ko sa mo sa ina ito orang lang lagi ay ka pemanteratan ay ka dia ng sa na marato ko bela namangas ang mawais mo sa iman ito ako lang bilaw Minasis, Minasis, Mengalipun akhirnya nama sembilan miliar. Saya kira dalam tas lagi saya pun termero saya kali dalam dalam posisi kita atlet ini. Hindi pernah memilih posisi termero hindi nak waisi. Dah waisi mal, dah waisi siapa pun kita tertulis yang suruh memang materi posisi kita dalam tas lagi dapat untuk posisi. Asal apa kerja kita menggunakan tentang kita memulai dengan kita nama saya untuk Kuhlem tidak. Mereka kemudian untuk.
I like how Kuhl is one of the words that I know in Palau. I've learned that when you're in the field. So because we were assuming that Kuhl or the rain had washed all the sediment from the top into the low-lying areas, we placed some of our trenches in those areas. And in these elevation models, the lower lying area is the more blue, the color. So we have a couple of trenches, for example, here in Siskiyou where we wanted to look into what effects of erosion and sedimentation there was. So basically, whether we could find that material that we thought had been washed off and deposited at the bottom. And like I said, for that you have to actually dig a hole, or in our case, a lot of holes.
Sa lupa kita wasi kita kalau kita kan yang share ni posisi lupa yang sa ating kita apa ni interior. Misalnya kalau ini sisi kita kita lubang misalnya kita memilih saya itu kalau saya ini kasih kalau lupa tendanya lalu saya ini orang boleh dengan lagi kita orang apa kita memilih sesuatu untuk merah Kuhlem masih nama saud nabi aman lagi kita untuk memilih saya ini terlalu Plus masih boleh kalau kita ini tuntas untuk apa masih nari namun kita untuk memilih nama saja.
So in 2020 we excavated 4 trenches of 2 by 1 meter, or I think that would be like 6 by 3 feet more or less. Across those different earthworks that we had selected, and we looked into construction techniques, what the function is, what those earthworks were used for, and like I said, the effects of erosion.
Menjadi berhubungi saya sebagai proses proses mengerama agar harus merang hotel ini hotel masih masa aku merupakan milion lagi ini sorry lagi.
So what we found is pretty much the exact same sequence of how people have built those giant sites. So they put a layer of this very soft volcanic rock, saprolite, on the bottom, and then put different layers of clay on, and on the very uppermost part they put fertile garden soils, and people actually made those garden soils fertile. So that is a huge deal, that people optimize, make their soils better to have better yields. So the question, how can we tell whether this clay is just there naturally, because that's the normal terrain of the island? Basically, as soon as you have any man-made material, like in this case, mixed in with this kind of clay, you can be certain that that is a human-like layer. And what is so very important about it is immense amounts of material that people have transported up the hills, spread out, compacted. So there must have been an immense amount of people living on Babeldaob and Annette.
Kalau ada tentang kawasan itu terus aktif langsung mesti lulus Bukan lagi kalau masih ada bisa itu belum tinggal proses mobile dari kaum bio kira lagi di kebun. Saya lalui saya mulai mau kita ini orang apa mengajar yang mau yang peran lebar ini orang mau yasan menurut kata mau mengikut mesti peran normal. Saya kita bawa ini lah. Mungkin timuan kita sama sih. Mereka duluan Los para hal ini sebetulnya ada turun dan turun, lewat orang Thailand, kemudian memang lagi Indonesia sebenarnya Indonesia orang so saya kita untuk melihat aja ada teman. Amor lagi dan dokter masalah belakang lagi tadi terlalu musik hal ini sebetulnya ada turun apa turun dari kita.
We did a couple of trenches right at the base of those very, very high areas, those very steep areas, and that's exactly where you would get deposited material from the top, and that is probably one of our most significant results, that we did not find those. So our initial hypothesis, where we thought, oh, those heavy rains here and they washed everything down with snow, we were proven wrong, because we would see that in those soil profiles. You can see fine layers where every time when water washes down soil down a hill, it gets deposited at the bottom, and it's very easy to see if you know what you're looking for. And we did not find those. There were a few of those trenches where we had maybe an inch or half an inch, but all the rest of these constructions have been standing there pretty much unaltered, unchanged for hundreds or even thousands of years. And that is one of the coolest people that is absolutely out there, that so long ago people already had those kind of knowledge about soil stability and that kind of engineering knowledge to create something that stable.
Mukhang lagi iwan lo ay sedikit pulau sih dan dia orang itu sulit setelah kau terbelah lo pasal kalau berenang mereka pulau sih ini enam masa ulam ayo tamla mungkin takut menurun misalnya masa itu lama ni saya itu kau terbelah mungkin lain lo berenang jadi kita luar mengulang pasal itu usai untuk lo ni sendiri pasal lo pasal mengajar serba dengan jauh. Semua kali atlet nasional dan bertajuk spesifik dunia yang bersuara kamu dulu masih kalau datang kita sedangkan karena mama karena itu orang ini nama satu mereka berdiri sehingga kalau berani apa syaratnya ada environment tak luasnya apa ini tanggal berdiri mungkin terlalu tinggi kalau ini luasnya dia luasnya sehingga kalau saya ini kalau ini terlalu tinggi saya akan ini mental masa tinggal lagi bilang ini supaya selalu ada mengenai tulasnya. Ada lagi kalau berada mungkin ada ini apne tejera kan tela ada apa yang mengenai ada mengenai tulasnya. Bila ada sama makhluk tentang mas lumur dia apne tela tejera. Marwah tulasnya tejera. Sehingga masih mengasih itu poin. Dengan kira berbeda, mata berbeda, dengan negara mana pun mesti tulah mau, langsung malos. Seperti itu mungkin apa yang ini belum datang, belum berhasil ada negara emas ini. Sehingga istri ada dengan emas dengan musik cool something. Jadi langsung lebih dari apa?
I second that. So, if we imagine how many people must have lived on Babeldaob to create all these, then obviously where there's a lot of people need to get fed. So, that is one of the things that we looked into. What's the function, especially of the flat area? We find any evidence for horticulture, for agriculture, and we did. So, I mentioned before we found those human-made garden soils where you have a lot of material, a lot of charcoal mixed in with the soil, and that is particularly good for plant growth. So I'll just show the sequence real quick. So you have this thick layers of then on top you have that human-made soil, that gardening soil, very fertile with charcoal in it. And then those planting pits that have been excavated. And we have found this very sequence of evidence for horticulture in each and every of those trenches that we did in that area. So there's been, which makes sense, a lot of horticulture, a lot of gardening done to feed a lot of people who made a lot of work for us.
Sa lulukoyin kan, maasa diwan, lulukoy sa kulase, ay kaya kita dunia man makro dome sa loob lang. Bukod ang konsepto ng sudah malinis, betul, ada magmong kaway kaya man makro dome. Masuk ke sudah malinis, betul, ada magmong kaya lulun, hindi kita hasil sebuah tikala. Saya nak subir tidak lupai kita berusaha dan berbuat apa, oleh proses nanya aku hasil, ini mau siasi menjadi itu pada kita lebih serius, yang mual tidak kalau hotel saya mesti negro atau sales, longgar atau kalau ada sikit ada semua terlalu. Sikit ada hotel lagi orang profesor ni, sikit seti pun berani pun. Esok orang ada dengan kita orang sikit lagi ada moya. Malah maklum, dengan ini luar orang kita awak maklum kita sebagai kita buat ini sebelah maklum. Sehingga ayat kita ambil tiga lagi dalam ini sebagai ayat buku ngajar pun tidak lagi tertera yang luar dalam ini. Kita masalah logis, buat berbentuk teknik tawarkan tidak spesifikasi buku dalam. Lebih apa yang perlu dalam, lebih apa yang perlu lagi.
So this creation of fertile garden soil by human beings, we call them archaeological dark earth. That is a worldwide phenomena, and now we can put Palau on the map of the area where that has been done to increase the yields. What I have noticed is that much of the modern farming is also being done on ancient terraces, and probably exactly that kind of enriched soil, that fertile soil, is what makes it so good for planting even today, hundreds of years later.
Masa dulu orang ini apa sih? Nama saya dulu apa? Bela boleh ramap, jadi dulu hotel ada orang dulu laser, lagi kita dulu amannya baik juga begini, kita dulu lah kan hayul. Ada dulu laser seorang orang, bela warna orang yang kita dulu, itu nam tiga dolar tiga dolar. Jadi kalau ayat kita buka laser sedang ada, kalau misalnya kita yang buka laser kita boleh lagi dolar dalam, lagi. Teman-teman masih mengalami sedikit merawat sesuatu yang berbeda. Mungkin pun dengarnya pula dan sudah terbarat makan ini. Masuk ayat lu kadang kita nak sedikit sedikit macam pula pun hari ini dia luar bumi pun menderang ramong. Ulah bawa ayat itu terbarat makan menggol-gol hari ini.
So what we did during the second phase of excavations, which started now in October of last year, we had a closer look at the crown areas. So those very top areas of the earthworks, which are often those very peculiar shapes, like a half sphere or like a rectangle, and often have those very, very steep sides and are difficult to access. So that's what we looked at during the second phase of research.
Kita kita usah nak mereka ini new areas aku kan mereka berbeda lagi nanti. Kalau dah ada ini pilih sih berapa dulu. Mereka dah berbeda dengan mereka nanti long ini berbeda secara Oktober Mei. Itu pun orang saya ini karena mereka musuh lagi dengan dia, long hotel mereka begini mulai kali long dalam. Mereka itu pun musuh lagi. Ayat tertentu dengan long dalam lagi. Ay lo malala ke pan hotel sa kongres ay lo para para ng oil ay lo malala ay man bepul ay lo mo pa ay kita tu mau subir na mau mo de ang ano ay mo masuk sa hotel ay lo malala ay lo mo sa buko para ka bisa ba.
So these, what we call crowns, are often the very highest point in the landscape. Often you have a line of sight between different earthworks and the different crowns on top of them. So yeah, we always thought that that was kind of a significant point in the landscape, and there must be a reason why so much labor was invested into raising those crowns. So we excavated, one of them, this is Untitled in League, and we call it our little hilltop fortress. And we did a pretty significant sized trench up there. It was logistically challenging because it's very steep down, so you don't want to shovel all the earth down to the bottom and then have to shovel it again. So we did this whole construction using sand sacks. But we found some very unexpected finds up there on the ground.
Gusto daw is kung sa iingin at kuwang magiging manatagtalik galong kita sa doon sa wala man niya tugubin sa dugul marata milu dan manu gidiray dan ako marisip na sa malutol kasi wala ko rin sa iingin wala lang kaya kita kawin nila wala sa iingin mumungi sa magkaya kita ang niyangkot ng kolongi sa niya o lang ako na hindi ako na punsa ngarmani tira pula se tema mahal gilikai kaya kapten memandiri tira mengis dia mengis dia mengis pada kalau orang kalau belum pernah mungkin memberi memandiri tahu ini dan membantu mengis orang kalau akabet jadi orang belum datang dia pun menjaga itu ada cukup memberi lemak dan sebab siang kita tahu ini mandiri.
We did one test trench on top of this ground in 2020, and we found a pit, or the outline of a pit, that looked like a grave pit. But it's not, well, basically, as long as it's just a pit, it could have been used for a lot of different reasons, and what was always missing were stones. So there were a couple of areas already excavated where there were grave pits and some small fragments of a skeleton. So we were very, very lucky that here in Einli we were able to find 6 skeletons, and some of them really preserved so well that they still had ribs. I'm showing this image just to highlight it a little bit more. What's so important is also, so this is a good, 5 feet below the surface, and you also have this very wide stone layer. So people brought all these stones up there. They're also not natural, so people laid out those stones and then buried their head on top of it.
Saudara wanita masuk masa saya kalau start dari orang ini saya kira tidak dalam itu kita orang beda mungkin yang sebenarnya itu berbeda dia orang tugas masalah itu ketika orang EU itu burung dan rakyat so pilih ini sebelum negara dalam mana sah kimsa well double has 6 feet kalau murido teman-teman tengah jadi kaya EU sekali dalam momen kalau EU selesai jadi dia sudah berpikir aset kayak itu logi segi pula sebenarnya lagi dari bawah dengan aset kan ada tidak masih kan kalau orang sudah ada lemak terap mungkin menurut yang benar terdekat majlis stipen kurang dikira lora dan mose yang telah berada sehingga kalau diri sebenarnya mengasih itu.
What's also interesting is that these skeletons are oriented differently. So there's 2 phases, and the ones on the lower area, right on top of these stones, they are oriented east-west, and then the later ones in the upper left area of the image here, they are oriented north-south. So that's very interesting how apparently through time there was a change in the orientation. Or there might be other factors that we don't yet understand why some were oriented this way and the others that way.
Kalau orang masih ada boleh sebab saya ini Yuri saya literally ini saya rolak berarti jika ada tanggung dengan ambil mengajukan momes awal dari east dan west. Maksudnya mau saya kira mungkin ini awal guna east jika kita terhib guna west. Sebelum saya tanggung Yuri dengan sebab north south. Kebukuan ulang berarti north south. after nila kung naasawa, ano, ako nila, naman mga siya, kurada ako dito siya, kung ako, ang niya, ako ulit ako.
For the lower skeletons, the ones that are right on top of the stones, what we found pretty exceptional is that the bones were placed right on top of the stone layer. And I know you're squinting a bit, it's not easy to see. That's how decomposed the bones are. So it's basically on the left side of this image. The hollow bones have been squashed flat by the weight of the earth on top of them, but those are the legs of the human being, and the hip bone continues into the unexcavated area. But what's interesting, they were placed right on top of the stones, and we will look we took a lot of samples from right around the bones, so we will hopefully be able to tell whether they were maybe wrapped in some kind of mat, like a pandanus mat or something of that sort, and the analysis should show that.
Allora con il caso della cosa è use c'era lo dice dopo non dire così one credo regolare il pa gaya del use come se ni se come se ni una volta fatto mal lo delle use di un miglior quasi che le deu del tanto ma dire che non metta kam na mo ora use di one da che volava membuat kita lo subi belum saya orang lagi lagi untuk menilai ini lola banyak lagi untuk saya proses koordinasi untuk merangkap mau urus masalah ngarnya apa tapi orang masing atau all tentang kami dulu atau all di minum bisa terlihat sehingga dalam dan kami berangkat lagi orang pun menunjukkan lagi ini story orang mes yang suruh pasal lagi bersih bagi anda kalau pasal mana ada ini dah atau oleh negara atau soal jadi lah tidak perlu begini memang interesting sebenarnya mereka itu dong suruh itu mereka sempat menyamakan dan tidak orang berjalan.
This is a close-up photo of the upper skeletons, so you can see they're really exceptionally well preserved. The problem with bones usually in Babeldaob is that they are very acidic. So human bone or any bone breaks down very fast. So yeah, it's exceptional that they were so well preserved, and that's also something that we want to look into, whether people maybe added, for example, lime, which we know from the rock islands preserves skeletons very well, and the people back then already were aware of that too. So that's also something where we took a lot of samples and we're going to analyze that, whether something was put in with the bones to preserve them.
Alam ko rin nagpasa kung sa ikigil mong inyuri sa dinakap, kaya ito na raw, kaya ito bones, maluwan din usela se mantel buat dia umumnya preserve membuat orang yang use mengulang yang berbuat masih aku meraba tahu amat kau asih di kerni maka use sama juga tahu asal kiprah use tapi apa tahu amat kau asih di kerni saya yang menginginkan mereka Hindi kerjaan agar kita boleh sebenarnya orang berangkat dari use material yang akan terjadi berlaku pemilihan mereka musuh musuh. Tidak ada ulun yang memilih mesti dibuat belakang kalian bilangnya orang melepas supaya atau online mereka dia aus. Kalau dulu nama aus orang makanan di mana kita ada incip persen environment. Kalau mesti awal sebelum orang ini tidak perlu terkibul, mau jalan di Indonesia. Sehingga kita kesulitan pada unsur dia sudah masuk sekir dan terlihat sekir itu sudah tidak apa kita ngari ini mengeluar sana apa mana sebenarnya itu bukan Indonesia atau unsur ini kalau unsur ini kita mau sekir pada laut.
So we have dates already for one of the burial pits from the original pit that we did 2 years ago, and the dates are about 1,300 years old. So the fill of that burial dates to 652 to 722 AD, and so we're talking about over 1,000 for that burial pit, and that makes it even more significant that the bones are so well preserved.
Bisa dalawa ina kung sa stage na dapat dalam sumber na galaw ng tininis nila wag gila yung pagkain ito sa dalawa sila masya ang gila yan alo mas hindi marakat sila na dalawa sehingga model use hindi masakit na mesada sige na mal lomas yan ang wala bigay Mansulit kung subaya ng mga dalip sa iyo, kaya makarang isa advice. Mali sa tubo na kailangan i-use. Kaya may dapat kailangan i-use na.
So what we could establish just from those last 2 years is basically we do have this multifunctional use. So these upper areas, these crowns were used for burials, and then the low-lying areas, the flat areas, were used for horticulture. Whether that is the case for each and every earthwork, we cannot say. We looked at 10 of them, and for the flat areas, we could say they were used for horticulture. We looked at 2 of them when it comes to the crowns, and the other one is also a burial site, but extremely different.
Sa lolo nila tidak tulas saya kita dua datang lagi awal tahun sudah tulas ni ataupun mungkin spesial ingin mana ataupun dari spesial belakang jadi mesti yang orang mungkin nari awal sales tu spesial orang sales berat makan dong mengenal ni ayah mungkin siapa spesial ayah roh dalam antara berbeda mungkin Lalu dalam dia tidak nak o sisi waktu itu. Ayah itu orang boleh termi, nanya hotel pasti terus. Dengan ini orang dalam lebih besar hotel ini tidak diusahakan untuk buka ini.
So the second crown we excavated is in Nagard, in and it's also that very similar situation to the one I just showed from Kiel, where you have this extremely steep wall going up, so it's almost vertical, but the crown area itself is actually triangular, and then you have those 2 berms in 2 of the corners.
Jadi kalau orang yang bahasa loob na lang terjang ito sa kuwang mag-ingkoro ready malung sa taman ng lugar ng lupa sige naman may sarili wali ng lugar magpapag na walang sarili hindi mo wali ko si tiyang part ng tiyayi ng klorong lalang ako mag-dribble ko na yung loob lalang domes tiyang triangular triangular murah atas sini murah si apa 2, 3, 4 ini ada 1, 2, 3 biasa biasa mansa dan mas ada orang tandang ini semua biasa jadi itu bukan sedih kita lalu terus dalam orang ini lah biasa kalbin orang poin komesan 1, 2, 3 kami kuangkan ini kita buat wah tidak ini kita lagi sendiri jangan ngapura keplau kapur.
In one of those berms, the right one here in that image, we already had a challenge in 2020, and there again we found something that could be a grave pit, possible grave pit, and that's why again we did a bigger trench there to look into that, whether those areas were also used for burials.
Mawal sa punya saya ini orang banyak orang yang lorong ini jadi lorong ini sendiri. Saya konten berbeda jadi ini sendiri. Ewan mintanya orang mungkin sih. Ya kata orang orang hindi na kasan ko ini buat ini menyesal. Alam mana belau, ya ulun dilutut mungkin mungkin sendiri. Saya ini dapat dalam sendiri berbeda. Ewan bisa saya tangannya ulun tidak bisa ini.
This is a drone photo of that area, and like I said, it is very steep up. So we excavated a rather big trench there, and in the drone photo you can already see that there are like those differently colored areas. You can see them outlined here, which look a lot like this. And then one level down, we were interestingly already on the bedrock, which I didn't expect on such a high ground. Bedrock here is saprolite, so it's very, very soft, weathered rock that can easily be carved, and that's exactly what people did.
Menurut saya tiada lo atau tidak lo dalam kau berlawis sedikit dan jasi lagi lo lawis sedikit awal lo secara logis itu dia itu nampak dari proses betul-betul bukan apa awal orang asal sendiri dia mengamal diribai Maligiran lugar dalam tapi kalau misal asyik betul-betul berpada kayak former minister pasti matematik orang masih nak boleh jadi orang buat itu.
So from what we found in the pits that we excavated here is that this very steep crown on top, it's actually mainly bedrock that has been carved and only has like a 2 feet to 3 feet layer of artificial soils on top. But what we found in that area with the berm is a series of pits dug into this bedrock, and we had human remains in each and every one of them. They are much more decomposed than the ones in Eileen, so don't be disappointed. In the photos, they don't show up as nicely as those skeletons, but in each and every one of these pits, we had human remains, and you can see that the pit contours are kind of overlapping, so it must have been used for burials over a certain amount of time, because some of the bones were not where they should be. So, for example, we found an upper jaw that was like this against the wall of the pit, and there is no way you could twist your head around. So it must have been that there was already a body, then the next body was excavated, the next pit was excavated, and the previous burial remains got somehow mixed through in the effect. So this must have been used over a certain amount of time.
Umur masih kayak gitu bisa kayak gitu orang yang betul mah setiap secara logis menurut penelitian orang Isia yang menurut penelitian alset yang Isia ini yang mau penelitian alset Isia ini yang menurut penelitian alset orang yang merangkai dia akan alset di sana orang yang masuk musik dia awal tenet belum tahu tentang melospek melak negara ini itu belum kita use itu sedang pakai relaan orang awal untuk benar-benar masuk dalam awal alat mana bawa orang lagi yang asal untuk perlu bawah sini memperlukan masih nah saya itu bukan mana ada tu bulan datang lagi di sini misalkan use untuk hukuman dosen orang pun yang orang dan boleh untuk sedang lagi mana saya tidak lihat ini menurut masih kalau kita dulu kalau saya use mana kalau saya Inggris You are getting used to driving less than 1 month. Kemudian teman seluruh kami yang pun berapa tabak wan asidik mengenai tadi. Awak akan use it. Kemudian.
So I'll just show the photos of the different, the different human remains in the different pits. I'll just show the photos of the different human remains in the different pits, just one after the other.
Hindi mo ko tayo betul lagi kita dan ulang lagi o tayo mo tayo mo bisa pas kita kayo marta kamla o ay sa tawara ka marta ko sa asili ka mo makapal asili ano ko makapil magkano ni man ko tayo makapal lagi ko mo mereda at usal akal mo niya.
So they're not as well preserved as an Ivy League, but they're still well enough preserved that we can identify where the skull was, so what the orientation was, especially with those nicely carved grave pits. So I'll just go through the pictures. One skull here, and another skull there. Those are those teeth, that upper jaw that is against the wall, that is not in any natural kind of position. Then you have a skull that continues into the back wall, and another one that I actually found on the very last, where I was hoping to just take one last soil sample and then I don't have time for this, but I still managed to get it cleaned and documented. Yeah, so we have in that very small area. Actually, we also have 6 individuals.
We ulo tayo siya sila ay lulak daraan ni ay terbidaraan saya telur kalau tidak selesai mandi air pasio asal tidak mandi air pasio lebih sedih kalau orang tak kalau berada teror komen kalau mesti kalau serang saya hukum melawan orang datang.
Okay, I was just thinking through them again. For this one, we're also fortunate because we also have dates for it from last year, again from the fill of that first back then still possible grave pit, and they're even older. So we have dates for that one burial pit from 313 to 406 AD, so 1,600 years old. So what's very significant about this is we have 2 areas, 2 crowns where we have human burials, but they couldn't really be more different. Yeah, it's like a completely man-made giant built-up crown, and the other one is pretty much natural bedrock with the pits carved into it. So I find that very interesting how there are such differences in burial customs from one side to the other.
Kalau mawai sedikit masih tidak nila claro berada awal kami hari dari kita awal sedikit teknologi dalam mendarat lagi terkini semua sedikit ini sebenarnya ini asal remember teknologi mendarat kita mata teknologi mendarat ini seorang sekali kita belum kuah kita belum orang-orang yang ada dalam Indonesia afal sebenarnya nila Indonesia awal alam dulu dulu jadwal pengukuran tungau awal dinakau ni matiwan dinedret untuk dimiliki untuk apa melakar sehingga lebih mas.
So that being said, that there are such things, there are also a few, I think, very important similarities. One of them being this inaccessibility, that the graves are very removed and very hard to get to. And the other one is that they are in very prominent points in the landscape, so very outstanding areas that are visible from far away. And that's why we have this idea that it possibly weren't just the normal population, just anybody who got buried in those kind of very exclusive burial sites, but then it might have been members of the elite. But yeah, those are questions that are definitely up for discussion. But yeah, just an idea to that effect.
Allora guardiamo se non تقول لك أروس الثلاثة لا هيقال لو بتاعك كده نقول لك هذا مين دينات بس لو بس يقالوا لا مسؤولين دينات من الله تقبلنا بتكلم كمان مرة شيء والتقول يقول لك هيقال كده من الله نقول لك هذا مين هيقال الأقوات اللي شيء وهني هيقال عمل التوقع عمل الأرباب عمل فكذا أروي يا بس Jadi kalau ada lebih dengan nakatakin tomat dan liliang ay video berumur terbuka. Saya ada mau saya mau korektor soal. Saya mau yang aku lah saya. Terlalu lama ini. Untuk pulang saya sebelum tak ini nanti dengan hospital atau elit awal ini dan awal akan dulu lagi kita mana tertentu lagi. Man walasan ora peltuk man ngarap ilmali la ko don mas ko ni do la para muwa to mo bet sa aba ko ni da ora ni
We found two objects in the fill of one of the burials, and those are two pieces of coral. One of them, the lower one, is actually perforated, like you can wear it around your neck. And this is from what I've heard. When we found coral, the workers, they all mentioned, if you find coral with a grave, that means that the person is not from that place, that the person came over the sea. And those are those kind of, that kind of cultural background that I don't have. And that's why I place importance on sharing our results with you so that you can give us input. The question of interpretation of finds and the findings is always us as archaeologists are also human beings, but we come from a different cultural background. And so when people ask me why did they do this or that, I can't answer that question because, like Kiel said in the beginning, I'm from Germany, born in the early 80s, so I can say what Palau in 2,000 years ago, what his intentions were. But I think it is very important to bring the perspective of the community into our scientific work and add those aspects of oral history, of all, if there's anything you would like to add or you would like to correct me on, I'm very open for any of that you please do that. And with that I would like to thank you all very much for your interest, for the opportunity that we could do this project here. We have received help from so many sides, so yes, a big thank you. I especially want to thank our local excavation team. Those guys have been doing all the heavy lifting, and I always say I'm not surprised that Palauans were able to bring all these earthworks, and I see how those guys were working and hauling soil on the slopes. So yes, that's a very big thank you to everybody who made this project happen. A big thank you our Jen Julie Talay, who is our cultural consultant and gets us in touch with everybody we need permit from. So Julie, thank you very much. And there are a lot of people that I would like to cordially thank in the name of all our team. And we have some questions and answers after this. And I would like to actually, during show a drone video. We cut together a couple of videos that we took with the drone of the Earthworks, and we'll just have that running in the background. And please, any questions for the students? Any ideas? Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Kawalan na muna kasawa ng mga dito ako na nagsawa. Mga DOI sa kumasakit na nag-iisagin dan pula kagami. Pinti ka, higit na siya sila higit pa ng message ng wala. Higit na kong bagal A. Hindi na bagal A malupang marami. Pinti ka higit sila higit awa. Baka higit na higit sa kagami. Itindihan ko yung nilagay tinakalawalan tinakalawalan higit sa higit Mengisa, awal luar setir masalah kurang kalau setir dalam mengkola ada tempulasi asum penting lagi kurang ngara lagi ini tempulasi setir kan ada beda antara merah biru sehingga morning nanti mengara tidak cukup sehingga aku beri mesti dan dengan gue tidak kalau belum mengisol luar setir masentah ada orang lebih tidak boleh Mungkin luar kita seserang kami, pulau sini, minta dalam pulau iki dalam pulau serat, minta asal matangnya orang belau, menjauh sendiri langsung yang mungkin tukar matangnya kita lagi kita sendiri sendiri, mau supaya ini Tukar kita dalam suatu kita ini namanya asal ini kita tidak tahu bertinggal untuk ada ilmu sendiri macuni terapelai di awal counterpart dari belau tidak kalau kayak seluruh komputer dulu banding berapa ini otherwise masih atau belum ada kita open for questions and answers masuk nganya kali kira ini tokoh yang namun kira kali dosa bangal tokam kemudian bersama dengan kira office dolar ramai betul ya oh itu kira kali punya apa sampai longin atau for opening for questions and answers.
That's not one. You're going up enthusiastic. And thank you very much. You did a great job.
Kami akan mencari jemput rakyat dan parlemen. Mungkin kita open. Thank you for a very impressive study that you've done for us. And I would like to say that I'm from Ireland, and on my life I passed by these terraces with no real ideas what they were made for. My question. Can you make any explanation why would these people have left the flatlands and would have gone up the hills for a very strenuous enterprise to flatten the top of the hills and to make farming and all of those activities that they were doing on top of the hill. And one of the questions is, technical question is, did you measure the bones, the height of the bones in the graves?
So about why people would use the flat or would create flat gardening surfaces instead of using the swampland. Chronology-wise, it is not established that those big taro fields that are there nowadays were already in existence while the earthworks were in use. So it's not necessarily the fact that those giant taro areas or those giant areas with the possibility of cultivating were already existence during the earthwork or the early earthwork phase. Intentions, yeah, because we often tend to answer such or approach such kind of questions just from a rational standpoint, like why it would have been easier to do it such and such, or why did they do it if they could have done it much faster in a different way. But yeah, I always say there are often factors that we don't understand anymore, that are beyond just the technical aspect or the doability, the feasibility, the mere feasibility of things. When it comes to measuring the bones, we document everything 3D and geographic. That means we have for every point in the grade, we have 3D coordinates. Just for the one skeleton from IMB, the one stretched out one, he looks very tall. People have commented on that. What is 1.68 m in inches and feet? Anybody? So 1.68 m. This. Yeah. So not, he looks, or he or she, we don't know that yet, looks very tall, but yeah, I would say a pretty normal size.
Just last question, what kind of tools might they have used to do that large-scale excavation?
Well, that is what makes it so impressive. If you compare to other areas in the world where, for example, the Egyptians, they had beasts of burden, they had horses, they had a wheel, they had metal to build pyramids. But here, it's basically comes down to wooden tools, shell tools like shell axes, stone axes, and baskets to carry one person after the other, carry loads of sediment, of soil up the hills. So that's why we can calculate that there must be a huge number of people living here and cooperating and everybody pulling their weight. That's one thing.
Pati benar lo es posesión de la que rubaba post office di dunia della circolazione. Maraming mga production na kumuntas para una artada di na lo orang matandog na yun no mas normal ng matandog na ikalaw na lang yan. Hindi ka ko po sa orang na nila ako buwan ko sken mo legal man million mengkan bahasa di luar saya ay kay suatu pemikir awal boleh kalau sudah satu pemikir mungkin orang ko saya tendele na ko aku usia alam mentok legal dengan ya kita kalau saya sekitar orang kecil ke dulu lah ko wah ini tenda kalau mungkin wani teman ada tenda kalau bila berbeda orang besar berbeda waktu usia akan makai ini barunya kai magi mauleng ini ada spare mungkin memberulang posisi berulang posisi mani ini sudah tokalah kira benar sihkan untuk sendiri itu dia punya teknologi sekitar kita kali ini kita mungkin lupa untuk posisi apa mesti ini sebenarnya ya amak berlatih posisi lama kan nanti ini semua orang terlalu berlatih mungkin kalau main posisi yang rasis di leader sedang mulai posisi awal sedang orang awal mana kita orang lain posisi average saya sedikit ada beda apa komunitas sekitar sekitar ini berapa kita sebenarnya ada komunitas yang baru kamu mungkin nggak tahu ya.
Would you say that the bedrocks on the Evelyn burial site, were those stones from the rivers? They look, they're not from the ocean,
So you mean the stones that were laid out?
Yeah, the rivers.
So the ones that they're that same volcanic rock that we have in Babeldaob, many of them have like this green, like kind of sheen to it or greenish hue to it. That's the chemical weathering, but I know what you mean because they look kind of rounded, but that's more of like road in the river. So I would not say that they're necessarily from the river, but they were all that kind of rock that actually exists there in Babeldaob. Yes. So not one of those rocks is in a natural position. Like the whole mound is man-made and every rock has been carried up there.
Perché quello se dietro il fatto di essere di essere implicato, se non dice che implica che fa in realtà la università significa che il fatto che non è legale da una via che fa non è sicura mai di più non può essere nel momento tutti over period of time mai di pinangat na kapabala yun mga pinagpulo kiplas na sino kaya na ulo kaya na ulo kaya last na siya.
Couple of questions for you. What's your understanding about the time period when terraces were abandoned? Were they abandoned in a single event or was it a long-term thing? And the terrace swamps that along the shore is Babeldaob, which you were saying probably didn't exist when the terraces were being used. Where did they come from? And one last question, this is kind of a strange question. The first terrace you show here in the video from Emily, up on the crown, there was a big hole right in the very top that went down a long way. Someone could fall into. Do you have any idea where that came from?
So I'll start with the hole up on top. No, I do not. We put our trench to not include that hole. The very first time I went up there, I think in 2017, there was a Corona model at the bottom of that hole. So I actually have no idea. I talked also to Joey about it because we found another pit relatively high up in the actual trench that we excavated that was exactly half a meter square. And I asked Joey whether she recalls like any archaeological work had ever been done there, and we both.
I was curious, maybe the Japanese dug those holes because it would have been good lookout points through the war. I just wondered
No, I cannot know. It makes sense. I mean, on a lot of these earthworks, especially on the top, you find Japanese what do you call that? Survey markers, etc. But in that case, it's kind of that hole you refer to. It's too narrow and too straight-sided to be some kind of a foxhole. But we avoided that in placing our trench because it looked like something more recent that could have disturbed the archaeology below. So I don't have any conclusive idea on that one. What? Sorry, that was. Yes. Yes. Okay. Taro swamps. So from what I understand from the sediment cores that have been taken, that during terrace construction, and that's actually a very, very interesting point as opposed to the use phases of the terraces. While the terraces were constructed, there is a lot of erosion and a lot of sedimentation in the lowlands. And so during that initial construction phase, that is research that we have not haven't done. That was Athens and Ward, if I recall right. So they found a lot of erosion and sedimentation during the construction phase, which makes a lot of sense because before you can stabilize your building material, it has to be what do you call that? It has to be set aside somewhere. It's basically in its most vulnerable state. So you're extracting it somewhere, you're depositing it somewhere, and at some point you use it to build another terrace tier or whatever. And in that phase of construction, if you have those heavy rains that frequently occur, then you obviously have sedimentation in the lowlands, and that is what they found, and apparently that's how those areas were formed. But you can definitely correct me on that. It seems like actually the vegetation cover that is still on top of the earthworks now, like just this grass and shrub and ferns, that had a huge effect on stabilizing and on erosion control. So, and the other one was abandonment, yes. Yeah, that is a much debated topic, why and when and for what the terraces were abandoned. What we already have a couple more C14 dates from the trenches that we excavated last year, and it seems like it is not as abrupt as for a long time it has been thought that pretty much at some point everybody just up and left, and then more or less simultaneously there was an increase of sediment in the rock islands. It seems like that has been more of a transitional phase, more of a phase where the rock islands and the Babeldaob earthworks have been inhabited at the same time. And these our C14 dates that we have from the many test trenches all across Babeldaob, there are a couple that indicate that the earthworks have been in use for a longer time than it was previously thought. The more dates there are, the more those kind of chronology there. Well, when it comes to factors, it has been proposed that climatic changes and rain pattern changes have played a big role in that, but that is nothing that I am an expert on to be able to say what caused people to, at the end of the day, abandon those earthworks.
Siembang teknologi dari Vietnam.
So, again. Okay. May I see a show of hands again? How many people want to ask questions? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 4. And then okay, go ahead. Take the one. Oh.
Good evening. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. My question is, since you've done your research on these extensive monumental ancient terraces, I just wondered, is there any indicators of what are ancient terraces that they were sort of settled the way people lived leading up to this ancient terraces? Were these the first indicators of the monumental sort of setting for the people? And if so, also in your mind when you're looking at all these ancient terraces, because they're so massive, is there a sense of how many people must have been around at that time to have these terraces developed? And for what period, for how long was these ancient terraces being developed in Kiel? Like, is it for 500 years, 1,000 years in your mind? And you show some indicators of the age of these ancient terraces going back like 1300, 1600. But are there older ones than that? So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll again start with the chronology, and again I can only speak for the dates that we have from our samples. Johnny List was actually the one who established the big state-of-the-art chronology for the earthworks, and she defined different earthwork eras. So, Johnny, I don't necessarily want to speak for you. If you might want to answer that yourself. But
the earliest indication that we have that people were living inland with the archaeological data right now, and that you find something different than about 2,800 years they were carving part of Babeldaob, but by 2,400 years ago, they were definitely terraces were being constructed.
so that was the one thing. What? I'm sorry. What was your other question?
The population.
Yeah, that is a very interesting question that I have no conclusive answer to. The whole question is, I mean, now that we've looked at different sites, and for example, the last show in Gagar, it looks like this whole crown is man-made, but then when you excavate, it turns out most of it is actually bedrock, and there's just a thin layer of man-made material on top. And then on the other hand, I believe that entire thing is applied material. So that is pretty much the first question would be how much material has actually been transported, and then you can start calculations on what realistically one able-bodied person can construct in a, for example. So that's a lot of math that goes into it, and there are a lot of parameters still to understanding that. But it must have been a significant amount of people, and a much different picture than nowadays. And now with so few small settlements.
This is not a question, just want to share. By listening to you, I'm thinking about the Palauans like Japanese time. Because we went to the one terrace in Earthworks. Me, my sister, brothers, my cousins, my relative, went up there. And they dig, and we get by one mother boat. And we put in the small coffin, and then we put it back on the boat to the city. And then there was a big funeral for the whole. I don't know. But the rest was there. We went around to the very top. And then my father told us, when we go up there, look for the... My father said, when you go up to the very top, look for the... Look for the cement that they tie the gold to at the top. very, very heavy. Round one, but short. My father said, when you go up there, look for that thing. And then you remove and you start digging. So that's what they did, my brothers and my cousins. They went there and they removed, and they tried one by one to carry. It's very, very heavy. So my father must have been very, very strong, or maybe the Japanese time they were stronger because of the war, I don't know. But he took that one up. He went around to the way up. So when they removed it and started digging, they found the bones.
Wow, that's amazing.
And they put it in a small coffin and then brought it back to the city.
That's very interesting. That's in Nagma?
Yes.
Do you know what's the terrace called?
The terrace is Gelarayu. Tumulong kilo apa para Gelarayu. Bagi marabilas ng portion dito, mamalagyan ng magandang pagbabawa.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much.
And there was still maybe one left because we saw the past, like showing there is somebody here. But we only went for my mama.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much, Dr. Kuhlem, for your wonderful presentation, and of course for your very hard work in the last almost 5-6 months here in Palau, as well as in the years before. So that was your fourth visit and your work here in Palau. Can you just tell us a little bit about how your work is being financed, how it is so that we can do this work here? Then the next question would be, with this segment now ending, you're going back home in a few days. What other results are you expecting from, let's say, dating those clay pots, fragments, and other things that you can take back to Germany to have them dated? When we find out about the results on that, and what are your plans for another visit? Or was this here the final at the end of your research? What do you wish to do?
Yeah, thank you. So, first of all, we are financed, the project is financed through the German Research Foundation, so that is tax financed research foundation, and the German Archaeological Institute, which is a subdivision of the State Department, and our university itself. We have a lot of analysis to do, very, very diverse things that we want to look into. Most of it in the lab, starting with all the sediment samples right around the bodies that we found, to see whether we can find microfossils, phytoliths of possible plant mats, or what I mentioned earlier, to see whether there might have been some additive put in with the bones to preserve them. Those are all for the moment their ideas, and we're really excited to have them proven or disproven. Either is result. We are very lucky when it comes to fireplaces associated with evidence, so that gives us very good material for dating. So we will be able to see, hopefully exclude that those are World War II remains up there. from the layering, from the stratigraphy, it really doesn't look like that, but it is curious. Bones are so well preserved, but yeah, that's what we take all those samples home for, and then get all the lab analysis. What else are we planning to do? Yes, we're planning to date the ceramic sherds by directly pottery sherds. We have a selection. Then we're going to look at how the pottery has changed over time. That is one of the studies we're going to be doing. Yeah, so there's a lot of information that is still going to be rolling in the next months, hopefully. And I would definitely like to continue here. I think our chances are very good because we had such unexpected results in the last couple of years. So I would really like to look into more of the crowns and understand, because 2 is statistically not a very high number, but it's something that pretty much every crown we find human bones in that gives us a whole different pair of legs to stand on for our interpretation. So yeah, there's still a lot of information to process, and I hope I'm able to provide some results as soon as possible.
Thank you very much for that very informative presentation. As with any other good presentation, I feel like I have more questions now than before. But I'm going to leave my questions to archaeology for later. I would like to take advantage of this time to ask Julie for oral history, and then Minister Kiel for future of this work. So first to Julie, based on the recent archaeological findings and your oral history interviews, what is sort of your latest takeaway on the hypothesis behind the intent of these mines? Is it more for sort of security purposes because of our earlier work in tribal warfare, or is it more for just showing power of the different clans? And then Mirai, Minister, while we're waiting for the archaeologists, we don't have enough archaeologists already on highway, so it takes time to do crowd dating and even do the days. In the meantime, what can we do to help your ministry expand on the oral history component? This answer that second question, Julie.
I'll answer both in English and Palau. So, thank you, Sharon. That's a great question. What's next? And thank you, Consul Thomas, for asking the question of how she got here. Because how she got here answers that question. It costs money. And thank you, Ambassador, for joining us tonight. It actually, what she's doing is something bigger than we think. And I'm going to relate it to the ministry that's been created by President West. People have always asked, why is human resource, culture, tourism, and development put together? And this is why. Tourism in Palau has always been water. It's a water-based tourism. And there's nothing on land. And what they found, Dr. Joey, what we're trying to discover and do now is we found that we actually have more to show than we actually do now. There's actually something on land. We have an actual culture that we've actually forgotten that we need to discover. And so part of what you asked is we need more resources to find out more. The more we dig, the more we have questions. And so what we want to do now is make culture sexy. And we want to make Palau sort of, if I'm not mistaken, Jolie, this is one monumental thing that is probably the biggest thing in my community. we want to not only promote that, but we want to make it more, what's the word? I mean, we have a very rich culture that we're not exploiting, we're not using it as a resource, and we need to tap into it.
There's so much more to study and learn, as Annette has shown us, and most of us know that. What is so sad is that a lot of much older people get past, but there are still people, and also younger people who, because of their interest, learn many things from their elders, so they probably get passed on. I can tell you that when I got interested in documentation, it is people who work in the government who help us get to this type of work. But up to this point, there were very little information on direct explanations of the language, except that we have the terminology that maybe Luke can share. I know that that's one of the questions I've always been asking. But there are stories related to the people who live in the higher grounds who are exploiting the people who live in the lower grounds in Babeldaob. So the people who live up there exploited people who live in the lower areas. It's kind of sketchy there, so I'm afraid I cannot throw so much into that, but I cannot express the importance enough of oral history documentation and just passing information you have learned from your parents to your children, or people of things you heard in passing that you didn't know was important until you started to become interested in things like this, because there's so much more information. Those of you who are old enough who went to the tarot matches with your mothers and your aunties, maybe you heard things that might start to make sense now that you're interested in this type of thing. I'm sorry, I'm not very full as far as that is concerned, Charlie, but it is important to ask questions, because some of these questions, some of the stories, as time went on, I found that my experience helped me connect the dots, even when it was not intentional. Because I talked to different elders from different places who drew light to or verified each other's stories. So I guess the only thing I can say is, if you're interested in this study, I'm very appreciative of Annette. I'm thinking if I was 15 and this type of information was available, I would probably have become a historian or an archaeologist or ethnographer. I was not interested at that time. That time was interested in you become a teacher and a doctor and a lawyer. Some other stuff, those that were sort of visible at the time. It's only after an ethnographer came and was referred to us that we began to do this type of work and how it is, and you all know your own genealogies and plant histories that narrates your origins from Peru to Palau or from Palau to those are some of the stuff, the information that tells you that we are an oral tradition, so don't put in the back of your mind the stuff that you learn. because a lot of stuff you heard that probably didn't make sense when you are alert. So I don't know if I answered or I spoke to the point that Charlene made. But if you're interested, talk to people, talk to each other. Because that's how I learned much from. So nothing is insignificant when you talk to other people, especially with we were colonized by, sorry for the say the right word, by the Spanish, German, Japanese, and Americans. We're very happy we're speaking Palau, we have a language. That's how strong we are. And so we need to encourage each other. The people in this room, we are champions. We need to move forward with what we know and talk story with each other. It's not time to hide it from each other anymore. I think all the time, ito sinaran ko ito, available, klaro. Taliwan, hindi ako share information na klaro yung mo maduro ka organization yung mo kaya na hindi na alam tayo ng mga siguro po lahat information na kailangan ngayon kailangan ngayon sa libela good for them. Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Annette. I was emailing and texting people all over who are actually heard this and so several comments came to the slides really clear. Really detail what you were saying and participating to the slides. I have two questions. One that Thomas mentioned is when we visited Kiel in Palau, remember I noticed the picture of really fine ceramic shirts and color. So it shows that the artistic work of the bronze were potters. And they were very reproductive. And so were you able to get samples of that to see, because it's fine pottery. And I was impressed by just looking at it and I touched it. So if you were able to sort of do some analysis on that, I would be good later on. My other question is, will there be a possibility to do dating? What plants were planted in the hills? And whether they were taro or no dry land. And then I just mentioned Julie, I think what she's also alluding to was intangible culture and intangible and tangible aspect of arts.
So about what was growing in those planting beds, we really tried to find micro fossils. Much of that is still at the lab. That takes a long time. That's always the problem, that everybody's anxious to get answers. But just sometimes the lab processing times, we work with a researcher from New Zealand, from Otago. But so far we don't have any results yet. What we do have with the screening tool nowadays, if you do radiocarbon dating, you also have to analyze what kind of wood was burned. And there we have a couple of pieces of red fruit, which is involved as well. From that aspect, but out of the planting kits, so far we do not have the results yet, and I'm really waiting for those. Oh yes, all those. So in 3 of the great pits from Kiel, there was very fine thin pottery, and all of those will be analyzed. First of all, for just the technical aspects of what kind of monitoring, and also be directly dated and see whether we can correlate that to the carbon. That was very, very nice. It's very nice pottery in 3 cases. We had nice pots at the foot of those burial pits, which were extremely thin, so really fine there. Very fine, delicate pottery. Look into that some more.
Can I ask one question? I need the mic. You mentioned about the teeth and the upper jaw. Any chance that you do the thorough data to tell us how is a male or female? And about the pottery that you found, any chance that they're related to outside from Palau, or you just they built it over here? Or that's my question.
Okay. Yeah, so the bones are, even the teeth are most probably too decomposed to directly date them. In some cases we have fire pits right inside grave pits, which is very unusual. It seems to me that people may excavate the hole, made a fire, and then put the body down. So that is awesome because we have that exact same context pretty much from the time when the person was laid to rest. We have datable material, so with that we can narrow it down pretty well. I took some samples for DNA analysis, which would be very, very significant if there were enough DNA still preserved, especially in the teeth. Not only from a Palauan standpoint, but like for the whole history of migration, of the colonization of Oceania, there is a couple of missing links, and there's this researcher group that has just been looking into, they have analyzed some samples from Guam, just been looking into what role the Micronesian islands played in that expansion. So that, I have very high hopes for, and I really hope that there's enough DNA. Then what was the other? Pottery. So basically, it's pretty in the lab. It's a pretty straightforward procedure to analyze where the clay of a given pot or just a piece of pottery comes from. So basically the clay source is easily identifiable, and so that is definitely a possibility where you could look into whether that is outside clay, but there are clay sources on Babeldaob, so the assumptions for now is that it's from local clay.
Kurang ular seipan so
thank you, Annette. If we get can we compare those DNA and maybe related to the Palaus of today? Will there get or?
Well, I am not a geneticist. Definitely, technically, that's possible. I mean, the question is what the sample base is for current allowance, and it's definitely possible. But I would not be the one to do that because that's something I outsource because I know enough about it.
Yung alas na pinundahan setelah kita ada lagi lah. Di semua tinggian mungkin kata para dan cara dengan kalau kita sendiri makmo kira penampilan minister kita nilai rasa betul mengisipkan yang mau ukuran dua di negara sendiri. Manusia.
So, kalau kita hasil koreksi another minister. The whole time, early 90s, thanks to spend our time Stuttgart University, Tanzania, Nagel archive of the people sa nila long hours, hero, hindi all hours nanya minute of that, patamit na dahil marami sa they want to find, madala lang mo 3 times a day. Man wala sa bayan nito. Isa na ba minister o isa mo ani pegi do para pegi ko swak mo sulit at ng anak na yan, wala lang ito mo mga Makpura banyak terkini dalam mengatur Jordi. Makpura mulai anak muda dari 1950 itu mulai langsung kerja. Belanja semua merawat dan terus bekerja dan belanja motor terus masih aku share ini. Saya kita langsung mulai lagi nak apa tidak itu semua kalau dari lalu orang awal baru ini atas terlalu orang. Interesting part ini aku tidak daftar alam archaeological institute. Jadi alam orang sahaja. Antara sahaja sudah berdiri dari industri kita. Kalau kita berkolom surat reaksi kita mau belum sudah terus seksi. Teman tengah alam surat environment. Untuk sahaja environment kita satu environment. Jadi ada apa yang sahaja. Kita harus sulit. Belum kita lalu jalan itu berapa air level, mengambil masa naknya, merubah naknya mau sembahyang sahur eleksi, mau sembahyang kita mau malah itu mana, itu yang usah bawa kepada berbohong, mau sembahyang mau air sedang, alam mau air sedang rekor dan lebih, dari ketemu yang kita melihat ada orang Yesus, yang ada dalam cerita. Mira del mobile kamu dan dulu share dan ada tu sen ada tu pokok tempat atau apa nama kita ni dalam apa lepas mana lagi ibu polisi kita mal orang sementara kita ada dalam orang taman ini orang ini sendiri yang berada memotong itu mau Makmul syuhang lagi dan mengirim ke bawah kamu dan kumat yang ada orang ini nantinya mengirim terkini makmul baca dan mobil arang kita akan orang tukang nasi mobil bukul belau mengirim dan bawah kamu dan dokter pada berbeda kita langsung kita boleh asal pasti berada maksud seperti itu misal ukuran berusia selalu terdekat hanya ada beberapa orang yang masalah kayak gitu jadi seperti itu orang mobil itu lengkap harus sebenarnya beres. Jangan soal kita anak musuh. So that's it. I really want to Annette again, and I'm not going to translate the legacy. You must be there. You and Jolie are hidden gems there, and what you uncovered and discovered, you kept yourselves for the first time, and slowly we're sharing it with the rest of Palau. I think it's very important. And I think part of our society that we've sort of kept hidden, the cultural aspect, especially culture is a very big part of every tourist product in the world. Ambassador. And it's something that we have yet to tap. It's something that we need to harness and share. And we need to learn about it. And to be very frank, I think this is one of the best tourists we have. Her husband is here. They've been here for 6 months. They rent cars, they rent homes, they hire people, they eat that drop off and everywhere. So they actually spend a lot of money in Palau. So we need more archaeologists. That's what, 200 of these things? 200 archaeologists in Palau, renting 200 homes. And I think it's big economy. And you told me something that one of your publications, it's the National Geographic in Germany or something like that. Spain. So I think you said something cool. said, in the nerd world, people know Palau. We need more nerds here. And so that's it. Thank you very much. And have a nice trip and hope to see you soon. Before I go, the president is here to share some words, and she has a party gift for you.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. One with all the flags of Palau.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Lagi magsiya, magsiya dalam, diwan maasam nadia, bisa tulungan kasi, umansal, nasa siya, nakawag mo akinurot yan presentation. Sa kinurot yan presentation, kasi siya na Irul kasi kamali magto at bilang bago mo spend mo na. Maka dito masabi mo magto at bilang. Olvida mo na masabatan hindi mo spend mo. Kasi na sa ni. Kasi na mo police sa kasi mo. O kaya kami kasi mo to mga kanre masa man interesting yung actually. Kung ako nang ngay kasi tayo ako local kaya sa bigyan magpakakarala kapag 6 years at tayo lang. But thank you so much. It was really interesting. And I'm so astounded by the sheer number of people that really could build these crowns. And also farming. It's in us. It's right in us. It's really something that they were doing back then. And now we talk about food security and having often we should go back to how it was, look back in our history of culture. What was given to us as a people. I'm also very, very happy to see the work that you're doing, and I thank you. Thank you, Dr. Annette, for helping us building here. Thank you so much. Just end the nakakalatrabaho ninyo, Eral de Jesus, y a David was el lobo se diría en la valillo. So, thank you, Dr. Annette. Moment to that.
Thank you all very much for your support and for coming tonight. And, we really had an amazing time here in Palau. The personal connections we made, the scientific results we had together. And, so thank you all very, very much.
Akan saya bukan sound manusia kalau saya proses lagi asisten para pol terima kita ama asisten orang dari Italia tidak tak asisten manusia sendiri dari masih asing so they take a photo with you. Whoever wants to take a photo with you, please come up and take a photo. So please enjoy our refreshments. That's it. Thank you very much for tonight.
you.